The morning alarm clock buzzed at 6:30, just like every other day. Tommy rolled out of bed slowly, his ribs still aching from 2 nights ago. He had learned not to move too fast in the mornings. Quick movements made noise, and noise was dangerous in this house. He pulled on his usual long-sleeve shirt, even though it was already getting warm outside. The sleeves covered the finger-shaped bruises on his arms. The school counselor had asked about those marks once, back in September. Tommy had mumbled something about falling off his bike. He was getting good at making up stories. Downstairs, his mom was already making coffee. She didn't look at him when he walked into the kitchen. She hadn't really looked at him much lately. Her hands shook a little as she poured the hot liquid into her favorite blue mug. The same mug she had used back when Dad was still alive, back when mornings felt different. "Your stepfather worked late last night," she whispered, not turning around. "Try to be quiet, okay?" Tommy nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He grabbed a piece of bread and ate it dry. The toaster was too loud. He had learned that the hard way last month. Even the smallest sounds could wake up the man who now lived in his father's place, slept in his father's bed, and sat in his father's favorite chair. The walk to school took 20 minutes. Tommy liked this part of his day. Outside, he could breathe normally. Outside, he didn't have to watch every step, every word, every breath. The morning air was cool against his face, and for these 20 minutes, he could almost pretend he was just a regular 12-year-old kid walking to a regular day at school. But even during these peaceful moments, his mind wandered to things no child should think about. He wondered if today would be one of the bad days. He tried to remember what had made his stepfather angry yesterday. Was it the TV being too loud? Was it something Tommy's mom had said? Or was it just the drinking again? The drinking had gotten worse over the past few months. What started as a beer or two after work had turned into something much darker. Empty bottles appeared in strange places around the house. The man his mother had married 2 years ago was disappearing, replaced by someone Tommy didn't recognize. Someone who scared him. At school, Tommy slipped into his usual seat in the back row of his 7th grade classroom. Mrs. Johnson was writing math problems on the board, her chalk making small squeaking sounds. Tommy tried to focus on the numbers, but his mind kept drifting. His left shoulder throbbed where he had been grabbed and shaken. His wrist was tender from being twisted behind his back. "Tommy, can you solve problem number 4? Mrs. Johnson's voice brought him back to the present. All eyes in the classroom turned toward him. He felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He hadn't been paying attention at all. I'm not sure," he mumbled, sliding lower in his seat. "That's okay, dear. Let's work through it together. Mrs. Johnson was kind. She always was." Sometimes Tommy wondered what would happen if he told her the truth, but then he remembered his stepfather's warnings. "What happens in this house stays in this house," the man had said, his breath smelling like whiskey and cigarettes. "You understand me, boy?" During lunch, Tommy sat alone at his usual table in the corner of the cafeteria. He had friends once, before everything changed. Before his real father died in that car accident 3 years ago. Before his mother met this new man. Before their house became a place where laughter died and fear lived in every corner. He picked at his sandwich, not really hungry. Across the room, he watched other kids laughing and joking with their friends. They seemed so carefree, so normal. He wondered what their homes were like. Did they run to greet their parents when they got home? Did they feel safe in their own bedrooms? Did they sleep through the night without jumping at every sound? The afternoon dragged on slowly. In English class, they were reading a story about a family going on a camping trip. The father in the story was teaching his son how to fish, how to set up a tent, how to identify different birds. Tommy remembered doing things like that with his real dad. They used to go to the lake every summer. His father would pack sandwiches and they would spend the whole day together, just talking and enjoying each other's company. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, like they were scenes from a movie he had watched long ago, featuring people he used to know. When the final bell rang, Tommy's stomach clenched with familiar dread. Most kids rushed toward the exit, eager to get home. Tommy moved slowly, packing his backpack with extra care, organizing his notebooks one more time. Anything to delay the inevitable walk home. The 20-minute journey back felt much shorter than the morning walk. With each step, the weight in his chest grew heavier. He turned onto his street and saw his stepfather's truck in the driveway. The man was home early today. That was never a good sign. Tommy stood at the end of the driveway, for a moment, gathering courage. Through the front window, he could see shadows moving inside. He heard voices, though he couldn't make out the words. His mother's voice sounded strained, worried. The deeper voice was getting louder. He knew he couldn't stand there forever. Neighbors might start to wonder why he wasn't going inside his own house. Mrs. Peterson from next door was already looking at him funny from her garden. She had started doing that more often lately, watching him with curious, concerned eyes. Tommy climbed the front steps as quietly as possible. The third step always creaked, so he skipped it. He had the front door mapped out too. Turn the handle. Slowly, push it open just enough to slip through. Close it without letting the latch click too loudly. Inside, the house felt thick with tension. His mother was in the living room, picking up magazines that had been scattered across the floor. She looked up when she heard him come in, and he saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. Fear, the same fear he felt every day, reflected back at him from the person who was supposed to protect him. "Go to your room," she whispered urgently. "Do your homework. Don't come down until I call you for dinner." Tommy didn't need to be told twice. He climbed the stairs carefully, avoiding the spots that squeaked. In his room, he closed the door softly and turned the lock. The lock wouldn't stop anyone from coming in if they really wanted to, but it made him feel slightly safer. He sat at his desk and opened his math book, but the numbers blurred together on the page. Downstairs, the voices were getting louder. He heard his stepfather's heavy footsteps pacing back and forth across the living room floor. He heard his mother trying to calm him down, her voice getting smaller and more desperate. Tommy put his hands over his ears, but he could still hear everything. He had tried everything, pillows, music, even hiding in his closet, but nothing could block out the sounds that filled this house after dark. He closed his eyes and tried to remember what his real father's voice sounded like, but that memory was fading too, like everything good from his old life. As the sun set outside his bedroom window, Tommy knew it was going to be another long night. Another night of staying very still, very quiet, and very scared. Another night of wishing he could disappear, or that someone, somewhere, might hear his silent cries for help. The morning alarm clock buzzed at 6:30, just like every other day. Tommy rolled out of bed slowly, his ribs still aching from 2 nights ago. He had learned not to move too fast in the mornings. Quick movements made noise, and noise was dangerous in this house. He pulled on his usual long-sleeved shirt, even though it was already getting warm outside. The sleeves covered the finger-shaped bruises on his arms. The school counselor had asked about those marks once, back in September. Tommy had mumbled something about falling off his bike. He was getting good at making up stories. Downstairs, his mom was already making coffee. She didn't look at him when he walked into the kitchen. She hadn't really looked at him much lately. Her hands shook a little as she poured the hot liquid into her favorite blue mug. The same mug she had used back when Dad was still alive, back when mornings felt different. "Your stepfather worked late last night," she whispered, not turning around. "Try to be quiet, okay?" Tommy nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He grabbed a piece of bread and ate it dry. The toaster was too loud. He had learned that the hard way last month. Even the smallest sounds could wake up the man who now lived in his father's place, slept in his father's bed, and sat in his father's favorite chair. The walk to school took 20 minutes. Tommy liked this part of his day. Outside, he could breathe normally. Outside, he didn't have to watch every step, every word, every breath. The morning air was cool against his face, and for these 20 minutes, he could almost pretend he was just a regular 12-year-old kid walking to a regular day at school. But even during these peaceful moments, his mind wandered to things no child should think about. He wondered if today would be one of the bad days. He tried to remember what had made his stepfather angry yesterday. Was it the TV being too loud? Was it something Tommy's mom had said? Or was it just the drinking again? The drinking had gotten worse over the past few months. What started as a beer or two after work had turned into something much darker. Empty bottles appeared in strange places around the house. The man his mother had married 2 years ago was disappearing, replaced by someone Tommy didn't recognize. Someone who scared him at school. Tommy slipped into his usual seat in the back row of his 7th grade classroom. Mrs. Johnson was writing math problems on the board, her chalk making small squeaking sounds. Tommy tried to focus on the numbers, but his mind kept drifting. His left shoulder throbbed where he had been grabbed and shaken. His wrist was tender from being twisted behind his back. "Tommy, can you solve problem number 4? Mrs. Johnson's voice brought him back to the present. All eyes in the classroom turned toward him. He felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He hadn't been paying attention at all. I'm not sure," he mumbled, sliding lower in his seat. "That's okay, dear. Let's work through it together." Mrs. Johnson was kind. She always was. Sometimes Tommy wondered what would happen if he told her the truth. But then he remembered his stepfather's warnings. "What happens in this house stays in this house," the man had said, his breath smelling like whiskey and cigarettes. "You understand me, boy?" During lunch, Tommy sat alone at his usual table in the corner of the cafeteria. He had friends once, before everything changed. Before his real father died in that car accident 3 years ago. Before his mother met this new man. Before their house became a place where laughter died and fear lived in every corner. He picked at his sandwich, not really hungry. Across the room, he watched other kids laughing and joking with their friends. They seemed so carefree, so normal. He wondered what their homes were like. Did they run to greet their parents when they got home? Did they feel safe in their own bedrooms? Did they sleep through the night without jumping at every sound? The afternoon dragged on slowly. In English class, they were reading a story about a family going on a camping trip. The father in the story was teaching his son how to fish, how to set up a tent, how to identify different birds. Tommy remembered doing things like that with his real dad. They used to go to the lake every summer. His father would pack sandwiches and they would spend the whole day together, just talking and enjoying each other's company. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. Like they were scenes from a movie he had watched long ago, featuring people he used to know. When the final bell rang, Tommy's stomach clenched with familiar dread. Most kids rushed toward the exit, eager to get home. Tommy moved slowly, packing his backpack with extra care, organizing his notebooks one more time. Anything to delay the inevitable walk home. The 20-minute journey back felt much shorter than the morning walk. With each step, the weight in his chest grew heavier. He turned onto his street and saw his stepfather's truck in the driveway. The man was home early today. That was never a good sign. Tommy stood at the end of the driveway, for a moment gathering courage. Through the front window he could see shadows moving inside. He heard voices, though he couldn't make out the words. His mother's voice sounded strained, worried. The deeper voice was getting louder. He knew he couldn't stand there forever. Neighbors might start to wonder why he wasn't going inside his own house. Mrs. Peterson from next door was already looking at him funny from her garden. She had started doing that more often lately, watching him with curious, concerned eyes. Tommy climbed the front steps as quietly as possible. The third step always creaked, so he skipped it. He had the front door mapped out too. Turn the handle. Slowly, push it open just enough to slip through. Close it without letting the latch click too loudly. Inside, the house felt thick with tension. His mother was in the living room, picking up magazines that had been scattered across the floor. She looked up when she heard him come in, and he saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. Fear, the same fear he felt every day, reflected back at him from the person who was supposed to protect him. "Go to your room," she whispered urgently. "Do your homework. Don't come down until I call you for dinner." Tommy didn't need to be told twice. He climbed the stairs carefully, avoiding the spots that squeaked. In his room, he closed the door softly and turned the lock. The lock wouldn't stop anyone from coming in if they really wanted to, but it made him feel slightly safer. He sat at his desk and opened his math book, but the numbers blurred together on the page. Downstairs, the voices were getting louder. He heard his stepfather's heavy footsteps pacing back and forth across the living room floor. He heard his mother trying to calm him down, her voice getting smaller and more desperate. Tommy put his hands over his ears, but he could still hear everything. He had tried everything, pillows, music, even hiding in his closet, but nothing could block out the sounds that filled this house after dark. He closed his eyes and tried to remember what his real father's voice sounded like, but that memory was fading too, like everything good from his old life. As the sun set outside his bedroom window, Tommy knew it was going to be another long night. Another night of staying very still, very quiet, and very scared. Another night of wishing he could disappear, or that someone, somewhere, might hear his silent cries for help. The next morning, Tommy could barely open his left eye. The swelling had gotten worse overnight, and his ribs ached with every breath he took. He moved carefully around his room, getting dressed for school like he was made of glass that might shatter at any sudden movement. Downstairs, his mother was making breakfast with shaking hands. When she saw his face, she gasped and covered her mouth, but she didn't say anything. She never said anything anymore. Instead, she just handed him a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a kitchen towel. "Hold this on your eye," she whispered, not meeting his gaze. "It'll help with the swelling." Tommy took the makeshift ice pack and pressed it gently against his face. The cold stung at first, but then it numbed the pain a little. His mother turned back to the stove, her shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to make herself disappear. "Mom," Tommy started to say, but she shook her head quickly. "You need to get to school?" she said in a voice so quiet he could barely hear her. "Don't be late." The walk to school felt longer than usual. Every step sent waves of pain through his ribs, and he had to stop twice to rest against street signs. A few neighbors were outside watering their gardens or getting their mail, and Tommy noticed how their eyes followed him as he passed. Mrs. Chung from 2 houses down actually took a step toward him, like she wanted to say something, but then seemed to think better of it. At school, hiding his injuries became impossible. The bruises on his face had turned deep purple overnight, and his split lip had scabbed over in a way that made talking difficult. His teachers kept giving him concerned looks, but none of them said anything directly. Tommy could hear whispers following him through the hallways during lunch. He sat in his usual corner spot, picking at a sandwich he wasn't hungry for. His jaw hurt too much to chew properly anyway. Across the cafeteria, he noticed the school. Counselor Mr. Rodriguez, talking quietly with Mrs. Patterson. They both glanced in his direction. Several times, Tommy's stomach clenched with worry. He knew they were talking about him, about his bruises, about what they thought might be happening at home. Part of him wanted them to figure it out, to ask the right questions and somehow make everything stop. But a bigger part of him was terrified of what would happen if they did. When the final bell rang, Tommy made his decision quickly. Instead of heading toward the main exit with all the other students, he slipped out through the side door near the gymnasium. He couldn't face going home yet, not with his face looking like this. Not with his stepfather probably already drinking and waiting for an excuse to get angry again. His feet carried him automatically toward the country road, toward the ranch, with the peaceful horses. It was becoming his escape, the one place where his mind could rest for a few precious minutes each day. As he walked, he tried to imagine what it would feel like to live somewhere like that, somewhere quiet and safe. The afternoon sun was warm on his back, and the further he got from town, the more his shoulders relaxed. Out here, there were no angry voices, no slamming doors, no walking on eggshells. Just the sound of wind through the grass and birds singing in the oak trees that lined the road. When he reached the ranch, Tommy took his usual spot by the white fence. The horses were grazing in the far pasture today, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. He leaned against the fence post and watched them move, amazed by how calm and content they seemed. What would it be like, he wondered, to feel that peaceful? He had been standing there for about 10 minutes when he heard footsteps behind him. Tommy spun around, his heart racing, expecting to see his stepfather or maybe a police officer sent to bring him home. Instead, he found himself looking at an older man he had never seen before. The man was probably in his 60s. with gray hair and kind eyes that reminded Tommy of his grandfather, who had died when Tommy was 8. He was wearing work clothes, faded jeans, scuffed boots, and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. There was something gentle about the way he moved, something that made Tommy's racing heart slow down just a little. "Beautiful animals, aren't they?" the man said, nodding toward the horses. His voice was calm and deep, nothing like the harsh tones Tommy was used to hearing at home. Tommy nodded but didn't say anything. He was ready to run if he needed to, but something about this man didn't feel dangerous. "I'm Jake," the man said, extending his hand. "This is my ranch. I've seen you here a few times this week, watching my horses." Tommy hesitated for a moment, then shook the man's hand briefly. "I'm Tommy. I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to be here. I can leave." "Oh, no, you're not bothering anyone," Jake said with a smile. "The horses like having visitors. See that chestnut Marais over there with the white blaze? That's Rosie. She's been watching you too." Tommy looked where Jake was pointing and saw the same horse that had stared at him on his first visit. She was closer to the fence today, and when she noticed them looking at her, she actually started walking in their direction. "She's coming over," Tommy said with amazement. "Rosie's always been curious about people," Jake explained. "She was rescued from a bad situation about 3 years ago. Took her a long time to trust humans again, but now she's one of the friendliest horses I've ever known." The word rescued stuck in Tommy's mind as Rosie approached the fence. The horse was even more beautiful up close, with intelligent brown eyes and a gentle way of moving that made Tommy feel calm just watching her. Can I touch her?" Tommy asked quietly. "Sure, but let her smell your hand first. Horses like to get to know you through scent." Tommy held out his hand carefully, and Rosie sniffed it with her soft nose. Her breath was warm against his palm, and when she didn't pull away, Tommy gently stroked her neck. Her coat was softer than he had imagined, and she seemed to enjoy the attention. "She likes you," Jake observed. "Rosie's a good judge of character." As Tommy continued petting Rosie, Jake studied the boy's face with growing concern. The bruises were hard to miss, and the way Tommy held himself, carefully, like he was protecting injured ribs, told a story that Jake recognized all too well. "Tommy," Jake said gently, "can I ask you something? How did you get those bruises?" Tommy's hand froze on Rosie's neck. He had been so relaxed for a moment that he had almost forgotten about his injuries. Now all the fear came rushing back, along with his stepfather's warnings about what would happen if he ever told anyone the truth. "I fell," Tommy said automatically, the lie coming out before he could stop it. "I'm clumsy sometimes." Jake nodded slowly, but his expression didn't change. "I used to tell people I fell a lot too when I was about your age. Had a stepfather who drank too much and had a bad temper." Tommy's eyes widened in surprise. No adult had ever said anything like that to him before. Most adults either ignored the obvious signs or seemed to believe whatever excuse he gave them. But Jake was looking at him with understanding, not judgment. "The thing about falling," Jake continued, still speaking in that calm, gentle voice, "is that when you really fall, the bruises are usually on your knees, maybe your hands if you tried to catch yourself. They're not usually on your face and ribs." Tommy felt tears starting to burn behind his eyes, but he blinked them back. He couldn't cry, not here, not in front of this stranger who was being so kind to him. "I don't want to get anyone in trouble," Tommy whispered. "I understand," Jake said. "But sometimes the person who needs protecting isn't the one you think it is." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of them petting Rosie, who seemed content to serve as a bridge between them. Tommy found himself relaxing again despite everything. There was something about Jake's presence that felt safe, like being near his real father used to feel. "Tommy, I want you to know something," Jake said finally. "You're welcome here any time. If you ever need a safe place to go, or if you just want to visit the horses, this ranch is always open to you. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady if he tried to speak. He understood exactly what Jake was saying, and for the first time in months, he felt like maybe he wasn't completely alone in the world. As the sun started to set, Tommy knew he had to head home. The longer he stayed away, the worse things would be when he finally returned. But as he said goodbye to Rosie and thanked Jake for letting him visit, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: hope, small and fragile, like a candle flame in a dark room, but real nonetheless. For the first time since his nightmare began, Tommy had met an adult who seemed to understand, who didn't just look the other way or pretend not to see what was happening to him. The walk home felt different that evening. His ribs still hurt and his face was still swollen, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a boy who had found a friend, and maybe, just maybe, that friend would help him find a way out of the darkness that had swallowed his life. The evening started like any other nightmare. Tommy had been in his room doing homework when he heard the familiar sound of his stepfather's truck pulling into the driveway. But something was different this time. The engine was revving louder than usual, and the truck door slammed with extra force. Tommy's stomach twisted into knots as heavy footsteps stomped up the front porch steps. Through his bedroom window he could see his stepfather stumbling slightly, catching himself on the porch railing. The man had been drinking again, but this time it seemed worse than ever. The front door crashed open downstairs, followed by his stepfather's booming voice. "Where is everybody? This house better be spotless when I walk through that door." Tommy heard his mother's quiet voice trying to calm the situation, but her words only seemed to make things worse. Dishes crashed in the kitchen. Something heavy fell over in the living room. His mother's voice became more desperate, more frightened. "Please, just sit down. I'll make you some coffee. You'll feel better after you eat something. Don't tell me what I need." His stepfather roared, "I work all day to keep this roof over your heads, and this is what I come home to. A messy house. And a wife who thinks she knows everything?" Tommy crept to his bedroom door and pressed his ear against it. He had learned to listen carefully to these fights. Sometimes he could tell when things were about to get really bad, and he could hide in his closet until morning, but tonight felt different. There was something more dangerous in his stepfather's voice, something that made Tommy's hands shake as he gripped the doorknob. "And where's that boy of yours?" his stepfather continued, "probably upstairs feeling sorry for himself." "Well, I'm tired of tiptoeing around here like we're walking on eggshells. It's time someone in this family learned some respect." Tommy's blood turned to ice. He quickly moved away from the door and sat at his desk, trying to look busy with his math homework. But the numbers on the page blurred together as he heard those heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. The footsteps stopped right outside his door. Tommy held his breath, hoping maybe the man would change his mind and walk away. But the door flew open so hard it hit the wall behind it. "Get up," his stepfather commanded, swaying slightly in the doorway. "We need to have a talk." Tommy stood up slowly, keeping his eyes on the floor. "Yes, sir." "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Tommy raised his eyes and immediately wished he hadn't. His stepfather's face was red and twisted with anger. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, and he smelled like he had been drinking for hours. "Your mother thinks you're some kind of angel," the man said, stepping closer. "But I know what you really are. You're just like your worthless father was: weak, pathetic, taking up space and costing money we don't have." Tommy wanted to defend his real father's memory, but he knew better than to speak. His stepfather was looking for any excuse to explode, and Tommy had learned not to give him one. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" his stepfather continued, now standing right in front of Tommy. "Walking around here with that sad look on your face, making your mother feel guilty for marrying me. Well, I'm done with your attitude." What happened next was the worst beating Tommy had ever experienced. It seemed to go on forever. When it was finally over, Tommy was curled up on his bedroom floor, gasping for air and tasting blood in his mouth. His stepfather stood over him, breathing hard. "Next time maybe you'll remember who's in charge of this house," the man said before. Stumbling back downstairs, Tommy lay there for a long time, unable to move. Every part of his body hurt. His ribs felt like they might be broken. There was blood coming from somewhere on his head. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was the crushing realization that this was never going to stop. His stepfather was getting worse, not better. and there was nowhere safe for Tommy to go. After what felt like hours, Tommy managed to sit up. The house was quiet now except for the sound of his mother crying softly in the living room below. He looked in the small mirror on his dresser and barely recognized himself. His face was swollen and bruised, and there was dried blood in his hair. Tommy knew he couldn't stay in the house tonight. Something in his stepfather's eyes had been different. This time, more dangerous, more final. The man had looked at Tommy like he wanted to hurt him even worse. Maybe hurt him so badly that ... Tommy couldn't finish that thought. All he knew was that he had to get out of the house before his stepfather decided to come back upstairs. Moving. As quietly as possible, Tommy climbed out his bedroom window onto the small roof over the back porch. He had practiced this escape route before during other bad nights, but he had never actually used it. His body protested with every movement, but fear pushed him forward. He dropped down from the roof into the backyard and started walking. He didn't have a plan or a destination. He just knew he had to keep moving. The cool night air stung the cuts on his face, but it felt good to be outside, away from the suffocating fear that filled every corner of his house without really thinking about it. Tommy found himself walking toward the countryside, toward the ranch where he had discovered those beautiful horses. Something pulled him in that direction. Maybe it was the memory of how peaceful everything had looked there. Or maybe it was just the desperate hope that somewhere in this world, there had to be a place where he could feel safe. The walk took longer in the dark. Tommy stumbled several times, his vision blurry from his swollen eye. But eventually he saw the white wooden fences appearing in the moonlight like something from a dream. The horses were harder to see at night, but Tommy could hear them moving quietly in the pasture. Their gentle sounds, the soft snorting, the swish of tails, the quiet footsteps in the grass, were the most comforting things he had heard in months. Tommy collapsed against the fence post, exhaustion and pain finally catching up with him. He started to cry, not the silent tears he had learned to cry at home, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his chest. That's when he heard the footsteps approaching. Human footsteps, slow and careful. Tommy's first instinct was to run, but he was too tired and hurt to move. Instead, he tried to wipe his face and make himself look less like the broken, desperate child he had become. "Son, what are you doing out here?" The voice was gentle, concerned, but not threatening. Tommy looked up and saw an older man walking toward him. Even in the darkness, Tommy could tell this was someone different, someone whose presence didn't fill him with immediate fear. "I'm sorry," Tommy whispered, trying to stand up. "I didn't mean to trespass. I was just ... But he couldn't finish the sentence. How could he explain that he was running from his own home? How could he tell a stranger that the people who were supposed to protect him were the ones hurting him? The man came closer, and in the moonlight, Tommy could see his weathered face full of concern. "You're hurt, son." "What happened to you?" Tommy touched his swollen face, suddenly aware of how terrible he must look. "I fell," he said automatically. The lie coming out of habit, but the man's expression told Tommy that he didn't believe it. More importantly, the man's eyes held something Tommy hadn't seen in an adult's face for a very long time: genuine care. "Nobody falls and ends up looking like that," the man said softly. "Son, are you in trouble? Are you safe at home?" Those simple questions broke something inside Tommy, all the fear, all the pain, all the desperate loneliness he had been carrying for months came pouring out in a rush of broken words. "Sir," Tommy whispered, his voice cracking with desperation, "can you stop them from impaying me?" The words were jumbled and wrong, but the meaning was crystal clear. Tommy was asking for something he had stopped believing existed, someone who would stand between him and the people who were hurting him. Someone who would make it stop. The man's face changed completely when he heard those words. His expression hardened with something that looked like determination, but his voice remained gentle. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy." "Well, Tommy, my name is Mr. Hayes, and I want you to know that you're safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you anymore. Do you understand me?" "Nobody?" Tommy looked into the man's eyes and saw something he had forgotten existed. He saw an adult who meant what he said, who looked strong enough to keep his promises, who seemed to understand exactly how desperate and scared Tommy really was. For the first time in months, Tommy felt like maybe, just maybe, someone was finally going to help him. Henry didn't hesitate for even a second. The moment those desperate words left Tommy's lips, the older man's face changed from concern to pure determination. He had heard enough stories, seen enough signs, and lived long enough to recognize a child's cry for help when he heard it. "Come on, son," Henry said gently, carefully helping Tommy to his feet. "We're going to take care of this right now. Tonight, no more waiting." Tommy leaned heavily against Henry as they walked toward the farmhouse. Every step sent fresh waves of pain through his battered body, but for the first time in years he felt something other than fear. He felt hope. This kind man with calloused hands and gentle eyes was going to help him, really help him. The inside of Henry's house was everything Tommy had imagined it would be. Warm wooden floors, comfortable. Furniture that looked like it had been loved for decades, and photographs of horses covering nearly every wall. It smelled like coffee and leather and something else Tommy couldn't identify at first. Safety. The house smelled like safety. "Let's get you cleaned up first," Henry said, guiding Tommy to a chair at the kitchen table. "Then we're going to make some very important phone calls." Henry moved around his kitchen with the same calm efficiency he showed with his horses. He gathered clean towels, antiseptic, and bandages, all while talking in that steady, reassuring voice that made Tommy feel like everything was going to be okay. "This might sting a little bit," Henry warned as he began cleaning a cut above Tommy's eye. His touch was incredibly gentle, nothing like the rough handling Tommy had grown used to. "I'm going to call Sheriff Martinez first. She's good people. Been doing this job for 20 years. She know exactly what to do." Tommy winced as the antiseptic touched his wounds, but he didn't pull away. "What if they don't believe me?" he whispered, voicing the fear that had kept him silent for so long. "What if he says I'm making it all up?" Henry paused in his work and looked directly into Tommy's eyes. "Son, I've been around long enough to know the truth when I see it. And anyone who looks at you right now will see exactly what's been happening. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand me? You are not alone." The words hit Tommy like a physical force. Not alone. He had felt alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to have someone truly on his side. Tears started flowing down his cheeks, and for once he didn't try to stop them. "It's okay to cry," Henry said softly, continuing to tend to Tommy's injuries. "You've been carrying this burden by yourself for too long, but that ends tonight." Henry finished cleaning Tommy's visible wounds, then gently examined his injured arm. "This might be broken," he said with a frown. "We'll need to get you to a doctor after we talk to the sheriff." The phone calls began immediately. Henry dialed the sheriff's department first, and Tommy could hear the urgency in his voice as he explained the situation. Within 10 minutes, Sheriff Martinez was on her way to the ranch. "Now I'm calling social services," Henry said as he hung up from the first call. "They have people who work specifically with situations like yours. Their job is to make sure you're safe." While they waited for help to arrive, Henry made Tommy a cup of hot chocolate and sat with him at the kitchen table. The boy's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the mug, but the warmth felt good against his palms. "What happens next?" Tommy asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Well," Henry said thoughtfully, "first the sheriff will take pictures of your injuries and ask you some questions about what happened. Then social services will talk to you about your options. They'll want to make sure you have somewhere safe to stay while they investigate everything." Tommy's heart sank. "Where will I go? I don't have any other family." Henry was quiet for a moment, then cleared his throat. "Actually, I've already talked to Mrs. Chun from social services about that. If you're comfortable with the idea, I'd like you to stay here with me. At least until we can figure out a more permanent solution." Tommy stared at Henry in amazement. "You would do that? You barely know me." "Son, I know enough," Henry said firmly. "I know you're a good kid who's been through something terrible. I know you love horses and you're gentle with them. I know you're brave enough to ask for help when you need it. That's enough for me." Sheriff Martinez arrived first, her patrol car's headlights cutting through the darkness as she pulled into Henry's driveway. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put Tommy at ease. "Hello, Tommy," she said as she entered the kitchen. "Henry told me a little bit about what's been happening to you. I know this is scary, but I want you to know that my job is to keep you safe. That's all I care about right now." She took photographs of Tommy's injuries with a professional camera, documenting each bruise and cut with careful precision. She asked gentle questions about what had happened, writing down Tommy's answers in a small notebook. "Has this been going on for a long time?" she asked. Tommy nodded, finding it easier to be honest now that he had finally started talking. "Since my mom married him, about 2 years ago. And your mother? Does she know what's been happening?" Tommy's face crumpled a little. This was the hardest question of all. "She knows, but she's scared of him too. He hits her sometimes when he gets really angry." Sheriff Martinez nodded grimly, making more notes. "We're going to take care of all of this, Tommy. I promise you that." Mrs. Chun from Social Services arrived about an hour later. She was a small, energetic woman with a warm smile and a briefcase full of papers. She explained Tommy's rights to him, told him about the process of removing him from his home, and assured him that his safety was now the most important thing. "The state has a responsibility to protect you," she said. "What's been happening to you is not okay, and it's not your fault. We're going to make sure it never happens again." The legal process moved quickly once it was set in motion. Sheriff Martinez went to Tommy's house with backup officers to arrest his stepfather. The man was charged with multiple counts of child abuse and domestic violence. Tommy's mother was questioned extensively about her failure to protect him. "She's not going to jail," Mrs. Chun explained to Tommy the next morning. "But she's going to have to attend parenting classes and counseling sessions. She won't be allowed to have custody of you again unless she can prove she can keep you safe." Tommy felt a complicated mix of emotions about his mother. He was angry that she hadn't protected him, but he also understood that she had been a victim. Too, it would take time to sort through all of those feelings. The emergency foster care arrangement with Henry was approved quickly. Mrs. Chun conducted a background check and home inspection, both of which Henry passed with flying colors. His references included the local veterinarian, 3 neighboring ranchers, and the pastor of the church he attended. "You're very lucky," Mrs. Chun told Tommy as she signed the paperwork. "Henry has an excellent reputation in this community. He's going to take good care of you." Over the next few days, Henry helped Tommy retrieve some of his belongings from his old house. They went when his stepfather was in jail and his mother was at work, making the process less traumatic. Tommy didn't take much. Some clothes, a few books, and a photograph of his real father that he had hidden in his dresser drawer. "Is this your dad?" Henry asked gently, looking at the photo of a smiling man in a baseball cap. Tommy nodded, feeling the familiar pang of loss that always came when he thought about his father. "He died when I was 9. Car accident." "He looks like he was a good man," Henry said. "I bet he would be proud of how brave you've been." The comment made Tommy cry again, but these were different tears than the ones he had shed in fear and pain. These were tears of grief and healing, of finally being able to mourn his father properly and hope for a better future. That first week at the ranch was like learning to live in a completely different world. Henry never raised his voice. He asked Tommy's opinion about things. He said please and thank you. He knocked before entering Tommy's room. All the basic courtesy and respect that Tommy had forgotten existed. "The horses are going to love having you here full time," Henry said as they walked through the pastures together. "And I could use the help with the morning feeding and grooming." Tommy threw himself into the ranch work with enthusiasm. It felt good to have purpose, to be needed for something positive. The horses seemed to sense that he was now part of their permanent family, and they welcomed him with gentle nickers and soft nuzzles. In the evenings, Henry would sit with Tommy on the front porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they discussed the legal proceedings that were still ongoing. Sometimes they talked about Tommy's plans for school and his future. and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, listening to the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling. And for the night, "I want you to know," Henry said one evening, "that this isn't temporary unless you want it to be. I've been thinking about applying to adopt you, if that's something you'd be interested in." Tommy looked at this man who had saved his life and given him hope for the future. "You really want me to be your son?" "I do," Henry said simply, "more than anything." For the first time since his father's death, Tommy felt like he truly belonged. Somewhere. The ranch wasn't just a place of refuge, it was home. The first morning Tommy woke up at Henry's ranch, he forgot where he was for a terrifying moment. His eyes flew open and his body tensed, ready to face another day of walking on eggshells. But instead of the cramped, fearful bedroom he'd known for years, he saw sunlight streaming through clean windows and heard the gentle sounds of horses moving around outside. It took him a full minute to remember that he was safe now, that Henry had rescued him, that his stepfather was in jail, and that for the first time in 2 years, no one was going to hurt him today. The relief was so overwhelming that he started crying right there in bed, tears of gratitude and disbelief. Mixing together, a soft knock on his door made him quickly wipe his eyes. "Tommy, you awake in there?" Henry's voice was gentle, patient. "Breakfast is ready when you are, son." The word son made Tommy's chest tighten with emotion. Henry had been calling him that since the night he'd been rescued, and each time it felt like a small gift. Tommy had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone care about him like a father would. Downstairs, Henry had prepared a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh orange juice. The kitchen smelled like bacon and coffee, warm and welcoming in a way that made Tommy feel like he was living in a different world entirely. "Sleep? Okay?" Henry asked as Tommy sat down at the table. Tommy nodded, though the truth was more complicated. He had slept better than he had in months, but his dreams had been full of confusion and fear. His mind was still adjusting to the idea that safety was real, not just something he had imagined. "The horses are asking about you," Henry said with a smile. Bella was looking toward the house all morning, like she was wondering when her new friend was going to come visit. After breakfast, they walked out to the pastures together. The morning air was cool and fresh, and Tommy could hear birds singing in the trees that lined the property. Everything felt so peaceful, so normal, that it was hard to believe that just days ago his life had been a nightmare. But healing, Tommy quickly learned, wasn't as simple as just being removed from a bad situation. The fear and pain he had carried for so long didn't just disappear overnight. It lived in his body now, in the way he flinched when people moved too quickly, in the way his heart raced when voices were raised, even in normal conversation. The nightmares were the worst part. Almost every night for the first month, Tommy would wake up screaming, his body drenched in sweat, and his mind convinced that his stepfather was standing over him with raised fists. But instead of anger or impatience, Henry would appear in the doorway with a glass of water and a calm presence that gradually helped Tommy remember where he was. "It's okay," Henry would say softly, sitting on the edge of Tommy's bed. "You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore. You're here with me and the horses, and nothing bad is going to happen to you." Sometimes Tommy would be too shaken to go back to sleep, and Henry would make them both hot chocolate, and they would sit on the front porch in the darkness, listening to the peaceful sounds of the ranch at night. Henry never made Tommy feel embarrassed about the nightmares or impatient about how long they were lasting. "Healing isn't a straight line," Henry explained one morning after a particularly bad night. "It's more like training a young horse who's been mistreated. Some days you make progress, and some days you feel like you're starting all over again. But the important thing is that you keep showing up, keep trying, keep believing that things can get better." Henry had arranged for Tommy to see a counselor, Dr. Rebecca, who worked in town and specialized in helping children who had been through trauma. At first, Tommy barely spoke during their weekly sessions, sitting silently in her comfortable office and staring at his hands. Dr. Rebecca was patient, though. She didn't push or prod. Instead, she talked about trauma in general terms, explaining how the brain responds to fear and violence, how the body holds on to memories of pain even after the danger has passed. Your mind is trying to protect you, she told Tommy during one of their early sessions. For a long time, being afraid and watching for danger kept you alive. But now you're in a safe place and your brain needs time to learn that it's okay to relax. Gradually, Tommy began to open up about the shame he carried. He had spent so long thinking that if he had just been quieter, better behaved, or more careful, maybe none of it would have happened. Dr. Rebecca helped him understand that children are never responsible for the actions of the adults who are supposed to protect them. It's not your fault, she told him repeatedly, week after week. What happened to you was not your fault. Those words felt impossible to believe at first. Tommy had internalized so much blame that letting go of it felt like losing a part of himself. But slowly, session by session, the truth began to sink in. Meanwhile, life at the ranch was teaching Tommy other important lessons. Henry started each day by having Tommy help with the morning feeding, and gradually added more responsibilities as the boy grew stronger and more confident. There was something deeply healing about caring for creatures who had also survived trauma and abuse. Many of the horses at Henry's ranch were rescues. Thunder, the old black stallion, had been saved from a racing track where he'd been pushed too hard and beaten when he couldn't perform. Sunshine, the golden palomino, had been abandoned as a foal and bottle-fed by Henry himself. Coco, the small brown pony, had been found tied to a tree with no food or water, her coat matted and her spirit nearly broken. See how Thunder keeps his distance when we move too quickly? Henry pointed out one day as they worked in the barn. He's not being difficult or stubborn. He's just remembering what it felt like to be hurt, and he needs time to trust that we're different from the people who hurt him before. Tommy understood completely. He still jumped when doors slammed unexpectedly, still felt his heart race when he heard angry voices on television, still had trouble believing that the adults in his life actually wanted what was best for him. But slowly, day by day, Henry's patient consistency began to rebuild Tommy's ability to trust. Henry never broke his promises, never raised his voice in anger, never used his size or strength to intimidate. When Tommy made mistakes, spilling grain, forgetting to latch a gate, breaking a piece of equipment, Henry corrected him gently and moved on. Mistakes are how we learn, Henry would say. They're not crimes that need punishment. School was another challenge entirely. Tommy had missed so much class during the worst years of abuse that he was behind in almost every subject. His concentration was poor, and he struggled with anxiety in classroom settings where there were too many people and too much noise, but his new school was understanding. The principal, Mrs. Walsh, had worked with Dr. Rebecca to develop a plan that would help Tommy succeed. He was allowed to take breaks when he felt overwhelmed, could eat lunch in the library if the cafeteria felt too chaotic, and had access to tutoring for the subjects where he was struggling most, the other students. We're curious about the new kid who lived on the horse ranch, but Tommy wasn't ready for friendships yet. He was still learning how to trust one adult completely before he could even think about trusting his peers. The legal proceedings continued throughout Tommy's first months at the ranch. His stepfather had pleaded guilty to multiple charges and been sentenced to 5 years in prison. His mother had been required to attend parenting classes and counseling sessions, but she had lost custody of Tommy permanently. She wrote him letters that Dr. Rebecca suggested he wasn't ready to read yet. Someday you might want to have a relationship with her again, the counselor explained. But right now your job is to focus on your own healing. Her guilt and regret are her responsibility to deal with, not yours. Tommy felt complicated emotions about his mother. Part of him missed her, remembered the woman she had been before his stepfather came into their lives. But part of him was angry that she hadn't protected him, that she had chosen her own safety over his. Dr. Rebecca assured him that both feelings were normal and that he didn't have to decide anything about their relationship. Right now, the ranch became a place of healing not just for Tommy, but for other troubled animals that Henry continued to rescue. Together, they rehabilitated horses that had been neglected, abused, or abandoned. Tommy found deep meaning in helping other creatures learn to trust again. Every animal we save teaches us something about hope, Henry told Tommy one evening as They watched a formerly skittish Mare finally allow herself to be petted by a visitor. And every act of kindness we show helps heal the part of us that remembers being hurt. Tommy was learning that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened to him. The memories would always be there, and some of the scars would never completely fade, but healing meant building a new life that was stronger than his past, creating new experiences that were more powerful than the old pain. 6 months after arriving at the ranch, Tommy had his first full night of sleep without nightmares. He woke up feeling rested and peaceful and realized that he had dreamed about riding horses through green fields under blue skies. It was the first purely happy dream he could remember having in years. "I think I'm getting better," he told Henry. Over breakfast that morning, Henry smiled, his eyes twinkling with pride and affection. "I think you're exactly right, son." 2 years had passed since that terrible night when Tommy collapsed in Henry's field, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The scared, broken 12-year-old had grown into a confident 15-year-old young man. His shoulders had broadened from daily ranch work. His face had filled out from regular meals and freedom from constant stress. And most importantly, his eyes now held hope instead of fear. Tommy still had difficult days. The nightmares came less frequently now, maybe once or twice a month instead of every night, but they hadn't disappeared completely. Dr. Rebecca had taught him that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a present and future that were stronger than those dark memories. "Progress isn't measured by perfection," she had told him during one of their sessions. "It's measured by how much better you handle the hard days and how many more good days you have than bad ones." The most remarkable change was in Tommy's relationship with the horses. What had started as mutual healing had evolved into something extraordinary. Tommy seemed to have developed an almost supernatural ability to connect with troubled animals, especially those who had suffered abuse similar to his own. Word had begun to spread throughout the local horse community about the teenager at Henry's ranch who could work miracles with traumatized animals. People started bringing their most difficult cases directly to them, specifically requesting that Tommy work with horses that other trainers had given up on. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Patricia, the veterinarian who worked with Henry's rescue operations, said one afternoon as she watched Tommy calm a terrified Mare that had just arrived from a neglect case. "He doesn't just train them, he communicates with them on some level that the rest of us can't reach." Henry stood beside the fence, watching with pride as Tommy worked his magic. The horse, a beautiful bay Mare named Storm, had been found tied in a backyard with no shelter, no proper food, and evidence of beatings. She had been so aggressive when she first arrived that even Henry had struggled to get near her, but Tommy approached differently. He didn't try to force contact or establish dominance. Instead, he simply made himself available, sitting quietly in the corner of the paddock and talking in low, soothing tones about everything and nothing. He told Storm about the other horses on the ranch, about the fresh hay that would be waiting for her, about how beautiful her coat would look once it was properly brushed. "You recognize their pain because you've been there yourself," Henry observed as they watched Tommy work. "And they can sense that you understand what they've been through. They know you're not going to hurt them because you know exactly how it feels to be hurt." Within 3 hours of arriving, Storm was eating grain from Tommy's outstretched hand. By the end of the week, she was following him around the paddock like a devoted puppy. It was the kind of breakthrough that normally took months of patient work, if it happened at all, but Tommy's greatest test came when he was asked to do something that terrified him more than any dangerous horse ever could. A prosecutor from the county district attorney's office reached out to Henry, asking if Tommy might be willing to testify in court again, not about his own case this time, but as an expert witness about the long-term effects of childhood abuse. "There's a case involving multiple children who have been severely abused by their guardian," the prosecutor explained during a meeting at the ranch. "The defense is trying to argue that the trauma isn't as severe as we're claiming, that kids are resilient and bounce back quickly. Your testimony about your own experience and your recovery process could be crucial in helping the jury understand the real impact of what these children have endured." Tommy's first instinct was to say no. He had worked so hard to build a new life, to move beyond his past. The idea of standing up in front of strangers and talking about the worst things that had ever happened to him felt overwhelming. "You don't have to do this," Henry told him that evening as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset. "You've already been through enough, and no one would blame you for wanting to keep your past private. You don't owe anyone your story." Tommy spent several days thinking about it, walking among the horses and considering what his testimony might mean. He visited with Thunder, the old stallion who had taught him that even the most damaged souls could learn to trust again. He spent time with Sunshine, who had shown him that love could heal wounds that seemed too deep to mend. Finally, he made his decision. "I want to do it," he told Henry. "If my story can help save even one kid from what I went through, then everything that happened to me will have had a purpose. Maybe that's why I survived, so I could speak up for children who can't speak for themselves yet." The trial was scheduled for the following month, giving Tommy time to prepare with the prosecutor and Dr. Rebecca. They practiced the kinds of questions he might be asked, talked through the emotions that might come up, and developed strategies for staying calm and focused while testifying the day of the trial. Tommy put on his best clothes and rode to the courthouse with Henry by his side. The courtroom was packed with people, lawyers, social workers, family members, and reporters covering the case. Tommy felt his old anxiety trying to creep back in, but he reminded himself why he was there. When his name was called, Tommy walked to the witness stand with steady steps. He was sworn in and took his seat, looking out at the sea of faces watching him. In the front row, he could see Henry nodding encouragingly, and that gave him the strength he needed. "Can you tell the court about your own experience with abuse?" the prosecutor asked gently. Tommy spoke clearly and directly about what he had endured. He talked about the fear, the isolation, the way violence had made him feel worthless and alone. But he also talked about healing, about the possibility of recovery, about what it meant to find safety after living in danger for so long. "The worst part wasn't even the physical pain," Tommy testified. "It was feeling like I was completely alone in the world, like no one cared enough to help me. But I learned that there are good people out there, people who will fight for you if you give them the chance." The defense attorney tried to suggest that Tommy's recovery proved that children were naturally resilient, that abuse didn't cause lasting damage, but Tommy was ready for that argument. "Healing is possible," he said firmly, "but it takes years of hard work, professional help, and having adults in your life who are committed to your safety and well-being. No child should have to go through what I went through, and no child should have to work as hard as I did just to feel safe in the world." His testimony was powerful and moving. Several jury members were openly crying by the time he finished, and the defendant was ultimately convicted on all counts. 3 children were removed from a dangerous situation and placed in safe homes after the trial. Tommy was approached by Mrs. Lopez, a social worker who had been moved by his testimony. She asked if he would consider speaking to groups of foster children and social workers about his experiences. "There's something about hearing from someone who's actually been through it and come out stronger on the other side," she explained. "It gives people hope in a way that textbooks and training manuals never could." Henry was initially hesitant about putting Tommy in the spotlight, worried that too much focus on his past might interfere with his continued healing. But Tommy felt strongly about using his experience to help others. "I spent years feeling completely powerless," Tommy told Henry as they discussed the opportunity. "This is my chance to turn all that pain into something useful, something that might actually save other kids." They agreed to start small, with Tommy speaking to local groups of social workers and foster families. His message was simple but profound. Healing was possible, even from the worst trauma, but it required patience, consistency, and the presence of at least one adult who refused to give up. "Every child deserves to feel safe," Tommy would tell his audiences, "and every child deserves to have someone in their corner who believes in their ability to overcome whatever they've been through." The speaking engagements led to other opportunities. Tommy was invited to help develop training programs for foster parents, to consult on legislation related to child protection, and to work with organizations that rescued animals from abusive situations. Through it all, the ranch remained his home base, the place where he returned each day to work with Henry and care for the growing number of rescued horses. The work continued to fulfill him in ways that nothing else could, reminding him daily of his own journey from brokenness to wholeness. One evening, as they watched a new rescue horse take her first tentative steps toward trusting humans again, Henry put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son," he said simply. "Not just for what you've overcome, but for what you're becoming. You're going to change a lot of lives." Tommy smiled, feeling the truth of those words settle into his heart. He had found his strength not in spite of his past, but because of it. And he was just getting started. 5 years had passed since that pivotal night when Tommy collapsed in Henry's field. And as he stood in his cap and gown on graduation day, the transformation seemed almost impossible to believe. The terrified 12-year-old who once begged for someone to stop his pain had grown into a confident young man of 18, ready to take on the world. Looking out at the packed auditorium, Tommy spotted Henry in the front row, beaming with pride, and wearing his best Sunday shirt for the occasion. Sitting next to him were Dr. Rebecca, Sheriff Martinez, and Mrs. Chun from Social Services, all the people who had played crucial roles in his rescue and recovery. But what made Tommy's heart swell the most were the familiar faces, scattered throughout the audience. Children from the ranch's therapy program, former foster kids he had mentored, and families whose lives had been touched by the work he and Henry were doing together. "Ladies and gentlemen," Principal Johnson announced, "this year's valedictorian, Tommy Harrison." The name still gave Tommy a thrill of belonging. He had legally taken Henry's last name when the adoption was finalized 2 years earlier, and hearing it announced to hundreds of people felt like a public declaration of the family bond they had. Built together. As Tommy walked to the podium, he thought about the speech he had written and rewritten dozens of times. He could have talked about academic achievements or future plans, but there was something more important he wanted to share with his classmates and their families. 5 years ago, Tommy began, his voice clear and strong, I thought my story was going to be about survival, about enduring pain and hoping to make it through each day alive. I never imagined it would become a story about hope, healing, and the incredible power of one person's decision to care about a stranger. He spoke about the ranch not as a place of rescue, but as a place of transformation. He talked about the horses who had arrived broken and fearful, only to become gentle teachers for children who needed to learn that trust was possible again. He described the foster children who had found their way to the ranch over the years, each carrying their own burden of trauma, each leaving with renewed faith in their ability to build good lives. "Healing isn't a destination," Tommy told the graduation audience. "It's a daily choice to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday, and that we all have the power to help each other on that journey." The ranch had grown far beyond what either Tommy or Henry had originally imagined. What started as a simple horse rescue had evolved into a recognized center for both animal rehabilitation and therapy for at-risk youth. Tommy's unique ability to connect with traumatized creatures, both human and animal, had become the foundation for a program that was attracting attention from social workers, therapists, and child welfare organizations across the state. After the ceremony, Tommy was surrounded by friends, teachers, and community members who had watched his remarkable journey unfold. But the moment that meant the most came when 12-year-old Katie, the newest resident at the ranch, shyly approached him with a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the fields that morning. "Thank you for showing me that it gets better," she whispered, her words echoing the same desperate hope that Tommy had once felt. Tommy knelt down to her level, seeing his own younger self reflected in her uncertain eyes. Katie had arrived at the ranch 3 months earlier, removed from a home where neglect and emotional abuse had left her withdrawn and afraid of her own shadow. Like Tommy, she had found peace working with the horses, and slowly she was beginning to believe that she deserved kindness. "It does get better," Tommy promised her, meaning every word. "And you know what? Someday you're going to help make it better for other kids, too." That fall, Tommy started college on a full scholarship, studying social work and animal-assisted therapy. But he continued to live at the ranch, helping Henry with the daily operations and working with the children who came there seeking healing. The arrangement was perfect. He could pursue his education while remaining connected to the work that had given his life such deep meaning. The therapeutic program they had developed together was elegantly simple in concept but powerful in practice. Children who had experienced trauma lived at the ranch for months or sometimes years, attending local schools but returning each day to help care for the rescued horses. The work was therapeutic for both the children and the animals, creating bonds of trust and healing that benefited everyone involved. Tommy had become the bridge between these two worlds, the world of trauma and the world of healing. His own experience gave him instant credibility with the children who came to the ranch. They knew he understood their fear, their anger, their desperate hope that life could be different. But his education and training allowed him to develop therapeutic techniques that were both effective and grounded in real understanding of what trauma survivors needed most. "The horses don't care about our past," Tommy would tell new arrivals at the ranch, just as Henry had once told him. "They only care about how we treat them in this moment. And that teaches us that we get to choose who we are, starting right." Now, the program had helped dozens of children over the years. Some stayed for just a few months before being reunited with family members who had completed their own healing work. Others, like Katie, needed longer-term care while permanent placements were found. A few had been adopted by local families who had fallen in love with these resilient children during community events at the ranch. Each success story felt personal to Tommy. When Jamie, a tough 15-year-old who had aged out of multiple foster homes, finally broke down and cried while grooming an old Mari named Grace, Tommy remembered his own first tears of relief. When 8-year-old David stopped having nightmares after spending weeks sleeping in the barn near his favorite pony, Tommy thought about his own journey from terror to peace. Henry, now in his 70s, had begun stepping back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Tommy to take on more leadership responsibilities. The transition felt natural and right, like a torch being passed from one generation to the next. "I always knew you were special," Henry told Tommy one evening as they sat on the porch watching the horses graze in the golden light of sunset. "But I never imagined you'd take what we started here and turn it into something this important." The ranch had become more than a place of healing. It had become a model for what was possible when trauma was met with patience, understanding, and unconditional support. Visitors came from other states to learn about their methods, and Tommy had been invited to speak at conferences about animal-assisted therapy and trauma recovery. Local universities were conducting research studies at the ranch, documenting the remarkable results they were achieving. The data showed significant improvements in the children's ability to form healthy relationships, manage their emotions, and succeed academically. But Tommy knew the real measure of their success couldn't be captured in research papers. It was in Katie's shy smile when she successfully taught a new volunteer how to brush Bella's mane. It was in the way former residents would return years later to show off their graduation photos, their wedding pictures, their own children. It was in the peaceful atmosphere that surrounded the ranch, where broken souls came to remember what safety felt like. Tommy had also started working with law enforcement agencies, training officers in trauma-informed approaches to interviewing child victims. His perspective as someone who had been on both sides of the system, first as a victim too scared to speak up, then as a survivor willing to testify, made him uniquely qualified to help others understand what these children needed. "When I was 12 and finally found the courage to ask for help," Tommy would tell police officers during training sessions, "the way you responded could have changed everything. Your kindness, your patience, your willingness to believe me. These things matter more than you might ever know." As Tommy looked toward his future, he felt a sense of purpose that still amazed him sometimes. The scared, beaten boy who had once begged for someone to stop his pain had grown into a man whose life's work was stopping that same pain for others. The ranch would always be his foundation, the place where he had learned that healing was possible. and that even the most damaged hearts could learn to trust again. But he could see a larger mission taking shape, working with legislators to improve child protection laws, helping other communities develop similar programs, maybe even writing a book about his experiences that could reach children who were still trapped in situations like his old one. The horses grazed peacefully in their fields as the sun set over the ranch. And in the distance, Tommy could hear the laughter of children who were learning that they too deserved to feel safe in the world. It was the sound of healing in action, the sound of hope being born from the ashes of despair. Tommy's story had become exactly what Henry had promised it could be on that first terrible night. Not just a story of survival, but a story of transformation, purpose, and the incredible power of human compassion to change lives forever. And this was just the beginning.